The envelope felt wrong from the moment I pulled it from the stack. It was thick, heavy with the weight of officialdom, the kind of paper that announces a life event, good or bad. The return address was for a bank, First Mercantile Trust. The name meant nothing to me. I'd banked with the same local credit union for 20 years. My first foolish thought was that it was a particularly aggressive piece of marketing, a pre-approved offer for some platinum tier nonsense. I used my thumb to tear it open, the paper resisting with an expensive-sounding rip. The first thing that slid out was a perforated sheet of coupons, payment coupons. My eyes skipped past them to the letter on top. The words "Final Notice" were stamped in angry red ink, so bold they seemed to vibrate on the page. My name was there. Arthur Vance, my full address, and then my social security number, printed right there in black and white. A loan. A personal loan for $50,000. I remember my breath catching in my throat, a small sharp hitch. I didn't take this loan. The statement was absurd. I'm a careful man, retired. My finances are a quiet, orderly garden that I tend to with precision. I don't take out $50,000 loans from banks I've never heard of. But there it was. My name, my number. The final notice date was from last week. I was holding a bill for a debt I didn't owe. My blood didn't boil. It did the opposite. It ran cold, a slow, thick sludge of ice water moving through my veins, leaving a strange, hollow numbness in its wake. This wasn't a mistake. A mistake would be a wrong digit in an account number, a misspelled name. This was too perfect, too complete. This was my identity, laid out like a blueprint for a theft. I sat down heavily in my worn, leathered chair, the letter trembling slightly in my hand. I had to call. I had to untangle this. It was a clerical error, a computer glitch. It had to be. The phone call was its own special kind of hell. An automated system that asked for the very account number I was calling about. I pressed 0 over and over, my jaw clenched. I was put on hold. The music was a soulless, synthesized loop that seemed designed to erode sanity. I waited. 45 minutes. The entire time, I stared at that final notice, at my social security number, a number I'd guarded my entire life, now just out there. Finally, a human voice. First Mercantile, this is Sandra. How can I help you? I explained, my voice tight but controlled. A final notice. A loan. Not mine. She asked for my social. I gave it to her, the numbers feeling like a betrayal on my tongue. I heard the clack of a keyboard. Yes, Mr. Vance. I have the account here. A personal line of credit, opened 3 months ago. The current balance is $49,812. The payment is 90 days past due. The world didn't tilt. It didn't spin. It just shrank. It shrank down to the sound of her voice and the words on the page in front of me. It was real. The loan was real. Can you tell me... I started, my voice a dry rasp. I cleared my throat. Can you tell me what address you have on file for this account? More typing. Sure, it's... She read it back to me. An apartment number, a street name, a city about 40 minutes away. It was my son's address, Kevin's apartment. The phone felt slick in my hand. I thanked Sandra, my voice a distant, automated thing, and hung up. The click of the receiver was deafening in the sudden silence of my office. I looked around the room, at the books on the shelves, the framed photos on the wall. One of them was of Kevin, grinning, his arm around me from his college graduation. My bright, ambitious boy, the hustler, $50,000. The money was a shock, a sickening number, but it wasn't the main event. The true insult, the one that felt like a physical blow to the chest, was the sheer, brazen betrayal. He hadn't just stolen money, he had stolen me, He had taken my name, my history, my lifetime of building a reputation for being solid and dependable, and he had used it as his personal piggy bank. He had looked at the man who raised him, who had loved him unconditionally, and he had seen a line of credit, a sucker, a mark. He used my life's work as his collateral. And in that moment, sitting alone in the quiet of my home, the cold in my veins began to crystallize into something else, something hard and sharp and very, very still. The morning sun feels warm on my back as I kneel in the rich, dark soil of my garden. To my neighbors passing by, I am Arthur Vance, 68 years old, a retired man whose greatest excitement is the first ripe tomato of the season. They see the gentle slope of my shoulders, the faded flannel shirt, the way I carefully tie up my tomato plants as if they were fragile children. They see a kindly grandfather, a man who has settled into the quiet rhythm of his golden years. They wave, and I wave back with a soil-stained hand, offering a smile that doesn't reach the part of me that is always, always watching. They don't see the ghost that lives behind my eyes. They don't know that the man patiently weeding around the zucchinis was once Arthur, the Vulture, Vance. For 30 years, I didn't just have a job, I had a vocation. I was a forensic accountant and corporate restructuring specialist. A title that sounds dry and academic until you understand what it meant. Companies on the brink of collapse would bring me in, a last desperate hope. My job was to perform an autopsy on a living entity. I would dissect balance sheets, trace cash flows through a labyrinth of shell companies, and follow the digital footprints of deceit. I wasn't looking for simple mismanagement. I was hunting for the rot, the executives who had been quietly looting their own companies, bleeding them dry while smiling for the annual report photo. I was the cleanup crew for the boardroom. I didn't break legs, I broke fortunes. I didn't use threats, I used subpoenas, asset freezes, and clawback lawsuits. I would systematically, meticulously, and legally dismantle the lives these men had built on their ill-gotten gains. I'd watch from across a courtroom as a man who once owned a yacht would visibly shrink when I presented a flowchart of his own embezzlement, so clear and damning a child could understand it. I took their second homes, their children's trust funds, their secret offshore accounts. I left them with nothing but their name in a headline and a mountain of legal bills. They called me the Vulture because I would pick the carcass of their corruption clean until only the bleached bones of their failure remained. I walked away from all of it 5 years ago. I left the tailored suits in the closet, the late-night briefings, the constant low hum of suspicion. I wanted silence. I wanted to trade spreadsheets for seed catalogs, boardrooms for a backyard bordered by hydrangeas. I wanted a simple life with my family, a life where the biggest calculation I had to make was how much mulch to order, and for a while it worked. The persona of the gentle grandfather began to feel less like a disguise and more like who I was becoming. The soil was real, the tomatoes were real, but so was my son, Kevin. He's 35 now, and he has always been a hustler. That's the word he uses for himself, always with a grin as if it's a badge of honor. From the time he was a teenager selling questionable concert tickets to his friends, to his latest, greatest sure thing app idea, he has always been chasing the next big score. He has the charm, the fast talk, the boundless, almost manic energy of a natural salesman. And for years I funded it. I was his angel investor, his patient father. 20,000 for a food truck concept that never got a permit. 50,000 for a crypto mining scheme that evaporated when the market dipped. Each time it was the same promise. This is it, Dad. This is the one. I'll pay you back with interest, you'll see. I saw a son who needed a leg up. I saw a young man with ambition, if not always direction. I never said no. It was just money after all. I had plenty. What I wanted to give him was a chance, the support I thought a father should provide. I never looked at those transactions as investments in a business. I saw them as investments in him, in our relationship. I was building a bridge between my quiet world and his chaotic, ambitious one. I thought I understood the scope of his ventures. I thought I knew the extent of his ambition. I was watering my roses the other day, thinking about how peaceful it all was, how I had finally outrun the ghost of the Vulture. I never imagined, not for a single second, that my son's biggest venture, his most ambitious hustle yet, wouldn't be another doomed app or a half-baked franchise. I never dreamed that the most valuable asset he would ever try to leverage, the company he would finally try to dismantle and restructure for his own benefit, would be me. I thought the $50,000 loan was a single staggering blow, a sucker punch from the son I'd raised. I was wrong. It was just the first crack in the dam, and over the next week, the entire structure of the life I'd built began to groan under the pressure. I became a ghost in my own home. The puttering grandfather my neighbors knew vanished, replaced by a quiet, methodical investigator. I told myself I was just gathering facts. But a deeper, colder part of me, a part I'd retired along with my suits and briefcase, knew I was building a case. The subject of my investigation was my own flesh and blood. It started with the credit report. I sat at my old oak desk, the one that had seen me through 30 years of corporate warfare, and navigated to the website. The process was familiar, a dance of security questions and personal details. When the PDF finally downloaded, it felt heavier than any file had a right to be. Clicked it open. The first page was normal. My mortgage, paid off for a decade. A single sensible credit card with a low limit I used for gas. Then I scrolled, and my hands, which had never shaken while staring down a $1 billion balance sheet, began to tremble. It wasn't just one loan. It was a sprawling, parasitic ecosystem of debt, all feeding on my name, my social security number, my lifetime of credibility. 4 credit cards I'd never applied for, all of them maxed out to their limits. The charges were a testament to my son's lifestyle: high-end electronics, luxury clothing brands, 5-star restaurant bills. There was a second mortgage application in process against my fully owned home, a brazen attempt to turn my sanctuary into his collateral. And then at the bottom of the list, the most damning entry of all, a line of credit from a lender called Quick Cash Advance. The name alone screamed predatory, the kind of place that charges interest rates that would make a loan shark blush. I did the math. My mind, once valued by Fortune 500 companies for its precision, adding up the columns of numbers. The total debt, all in my name, was closing in on $300,000. The figure didn't just land in my brain, it detonated. $300,000. It wasn't a number on a screen, it was the evaporation of my retirement security. It was the potential loss of my home. It was every worry I'd ever dismissed about my son's character, crystallized into a devastating financial reality. I couldn't stay quiet. The professional detachment shattered. I picked up the phone and called Kevin. He answered on the third ring, his voice breezy, background noise suggesting a coffee shop or a bar. "Hey, Pops, what's up?" I didn't mince words. "Kevin, I have my credit report in front of me. I know about the cards, the second mortgage, the online lender. What in God's name have you done?" The breeziness vanished. I heard the shift in his breathing, the subtle click of a door closing. His voice became tight, defensive. "Dad, relax. It's just money. I told you, my new app is about to blow up. It's a sure thing. I'm good for it. This is just temporary leverage." Leverage. The word felt like ash in my mouth. "Kevin, this is fraud. This is theft. You have destroyed my credit. You have put my home at risk." "It's not theft. It's an investment." he snapped, his voice rising. You never believed in me. You never supported my vision. This is how business is done now. You're just too old to understand. The sheer staggering audacity of it left me speechless. He wasn't sorry. He was justifying. He had rewritten reality in his own mind, casting himself as the visionary and me as the obstacle. I have to fix this, Kevin, I said, my voice low and strained. I have to report this. Don't you dare, he shouted. You'll ruin everything. Just back off, old man. The line went dead. He had hung up on me. I sat there, the dial tone buzzing in my ear, the phone feeling like a dead weight in my hand. The insult of the initial loan was now dwarfed by the profound personal betrayal of that conversation. He didn't see a father he had wronged. He saw an inconvenient creditor. The final confirmation of the escalation came the very next day. My landline rang, the old-fashioned ringtone slicing through the quiet of my study. I picked it up. Am I speaking to Arthur Vance? A flat, robotic voice asked. Yes, I said, my guard instantly up. This is regarding your outstanding debt of $42,718 with Granite Peak Collections. Be advised that if payment is not arranged within 72 hours, we will be initiating proceedings to garnish your Social Security benefits and any other federal entitlements. To speak to a representative about resolving this debt, please press 1. I didn't press 1. I slowly placed the receiver back in its cradle. The room was silent again, but the air had changed. It was no longer just the quiet of my retirement. It was the silence of a battlefield after the first artillery shell has landed. The phone call wasn't from a faceless bank anymore. It was from a collections agency, a blunt instrument of financial war. They weren't asking. They were threatening. They were coming for the foundation of my existence. The escalation was complete. The single shocking betrayal had metastasized. This was no longer a family dispute. It was a financial siege on my life, and my son was the one who had opened the gates. The phone on my kitchen counter lit up while I was washing my coffee mug. I let it go to voicemail, the way I always do. It was probably another automated call about my car's extended warranty. But when the little red notification popped up a minute later, something made me dry my hands and press play. The voice that came out of the speaker wasn't robotic. It wasn't the weary, overworked tone of a collections agent in a cubicle farm. This was different. It was low, gravelly, the sound of a man who smoked 2 packs a day and didn't care who knew it. Mr. Vance. Just my name. A statement, not a question. There was a weight to it that made the air in my sunny kitchen feel suddenly thick. We have your information. A pause, just long enough for me to feel a cold trickle down my spine. We know where you live. And then he did it. He recited my address, not just the street number, but the full address. He spoke the numbers of my home, the name of my street, the town I'd chosen for its quiet, tree-lined sidewalks. He spoke the name of my sanctuary into that recorder with a flat, matter-of-fact menace. Your son's debts are your debts now. We will be in touch. The message ended. The kitchen was silent again, save for the hum of the refrigerator. I stood there, my damp hands resting on the cool granite of the countertop, and I stared at the phone. This wasn't a faceless corporation anymore. This wasn't a computer-generated threat to my credit score. Kevin hadn't just been playing with banks and credit card companies. My son, my own flesh and blood, had been so desperate, so reckless, that he had gone and borrowed money from people who don't send reminder letters. People who send men. Men with gravel in their voices, and, I had no doubt, a very specific set of skills for encouraging repayment. They threatened my home. That thought landed in the center of my chest with the force of a physical blow. This house, it wasn't just a structure, it was the reward for 30 years of navigating corporate battlefields. It was the place where I'd buried Arthur, the Vulture Vance, and tried to become just Arthur, the grandfather, the gardener. Every flower bed I'd planted, every book on my shelf, the worn spot on the rug where I stood to look out at the backyard, it was all a part of a carefully constructed piece, a piece I had earned, and my son had given these men a map to it. That's when I heard it. It wasn't a sound in the room, it was a sound in my mind. A cold, precise, metallic click. It was the sound of a vault door, one I had sealed shut a decade ago, sliding open. It was the sound of a part of my brain, long dormant, powering up. The lights were coming on in a dark, dusty control room I'd sworn I would never enter again. The panic, the hurt, the profound sense of paternal failure that had been churning inside me for days. It didn't vanish, but it was suddenly compartmentalized, pushed into a soundproofed room, and the door was locked. The emotional noise was replaced by a humming, crystalline silence. The Vulture was awake. I could feel the shift in my own posture. My shoulders went back. My breathing slowed and deepened. I was no longer a victim, a bewildered father. I was a strategist, assessing a hostile takeover of my own life. The clinical fury that began to burn in my gut was a familiar, almost comforting sensation. It wasn't hot and messy like rage. It was cold, focused and efficient. It was the fuel I had run on for 3 decades. My gaze swept the kitchen, but I wasn't seeing the coffee maker or the mail on the table. I was seeing vectors of attack. I was assessing the asset, my identity, that had been compromised. I was calculating the resources and the mentality of the opposition. Kevin was no longer my son in that moment. He was the primary threat actor. The man on the phone was the secondary, more immediate enforcement arm. The battlefield was no longer a spreadsheet of deaths. The battlefield was my doorstep, and the part of me that knew how to win on a battlefield by any means necessary was now fully online, its eyes open, its claws unsheathed. The time for hurt feelings was over. The time for a response had begun. The silence in my study was a physical presence, thick and heavy. The only light was the single brass lamp on my old oak desk, its green glass shade casting a small focused pool of illumination on the polished wood, leaving the rest of the room in deep, consoling shadow. The voicemail had ended, but the gravelly voice still seemed to echo in the air, a phantom threat that had crossed the final line. My home. He had threatened my home. For a week I had felt the ground crumbling beneath me, the shock of the first loan, the sickening discovery of the others, the defensive, entitled rage in my son's voice. I had been Arthur Vance, the retired grandfather, the putterer in the garden. And that man was terrified. That man felt betrayed, heartbroken and cornered. But as I sat there, my hands flat on the cool wood of the desk, something else began to stir. It was a familiar cold sensation, starting deep in my core and spreading outwards, like a long dormant engine turning over for the first time in years. The fear didn't vanish, but it was compartmentalized, filed away as a data point, not an emotion. The heartbreak was sealed in a lead-lined box and lowered into a deep, dark well. The man who was feeling those things was receding, and in his place another consciousness was clicking into position, piece by piece, like the internal workings of a Swiss watch. The Vulture was awake. It wasn't a name I'd chosen. They'd given it to me on the East Coast, in boardrooms that smelled of expensive cigars and panic. Arthur the Vulture Vance. They said I circled dying companies, waiting to pick the carcass clean. They were wrong. I didn't wait for them to die. I was the one who performed the autopsy, while the patient was still technically breathing, finding the cancer of corruption, the rot of embezzlement, and then I systematically dismantled the lives of the men who put it there. I didn't need thugs or threats. I had the law, the numbers, and a profound understanding of human greed. I broke fortunes, not bones. And I was very, very good at it. My eyes, which had been wide with shock, now narrowed, scanning the darkness not as a victim, but as a strategist assessing a battlefield. And the battlefield, I realized with a chilling clarity, was me, my name, my social security number, my credit history. Kevin hadn't just stolen my money, he had commandeered my financial identity and was using it as his own personal fortress. He was hiding inside my good name while he lobbed financial mortars at me from within. The retired grandfather's instinct was to fight the individual debts, to call each collector, to plead and argue. It was a fool's errand, a game of whack-a-mole I could never win. The Vulture saw the true solution immediately. You don't fight on the enemy's chosen terrain. You don't try to dismantle the fortress brick by brick. You make the ground the fortress is built upon utterly uninhabitable. You salt the earth. The tools were all there, rusted from disuse, but still lethally sharp in my mind. The average person thinks of credit freezes as a temporary inconvenience. They have no conception of the absolute permanent fortress one can build. I remembered a specific powerful statute, buried in the mountains of financial regulation I'd helped clients navigate for 3 decades. It wasn't just about a simple fraud alert. It was the right to declare total war on your own identity, to file a full-scale, federally recognized identity theft report that would act as a legal shield of unparalleled strength, coupled with a hard credit freeze at all 3 bureaus, not the flimsy, temporary one, but the extended veterans alert that I, as a former professional in the field, could invoke. It would create an impenetrable vault. This was the nuclear option. It wouldn't just stop Kevin from taking out new loans. It would render my social security number financially inert. It would be like cutting the power, the water and the oxygen to a building. Anyone trying to run a credit check on Arthur Vance would hit a wall of pure bureaucratic titanium. No new inquiries. Ever. And that's when the beautiful, terrible symmetry of the plan locked into place. Kevin's entire world, his car, his apartment, his business lines of credit, wasn't built on his own merit. It was a house of cards constructed on my name, on my decades of financial history. By making that name and that history inaccessible, I wasn't just defending myself. I was pulling the foundational pillar out from under his entire existence. The resulting chain reaction would be devastating, and it would be entirely self-inflicted. His creditors, legitimate and otherwise, would no longer be able to come after me. The legal shield would see to that, so they would have only one place to turn, him. I leaned back in my leather chair, the plan fully formed, cold and perfect in its logic. Phase 1, protect the asset. That was me. Lock down everything with the unassailable authority of federal law and 3 decades of insider knowledge. Phase 2, step back and let the resulting chain reaction destroy the attacker. I wouldn't need to lift a finger against my son. His own greed and the financial predators he'd aligned himself with would do all the work for me. The Vulture had a plan, and for the first time since that first envelope arrived, I felt not fear, but a grim, resolute calm. The hunt was on. The man on the voicemail had given me the final piece of the puzzle. He hadn't just threatened me, he had illuminated the entire battlefield. This was no longer about a loan or even about $300,000 in debt. This was about the total usurpation of my identity, my life, and for that you don't fight back with shouts or threats. You fight back with paperwork. Cold, precise and utterly devastating paperwork. My home office, once a place for paying quiet bills and reading the paper, became my command center. The kindly grandfather was gone. Arthur, the Vulture, Vance, was back at his desk. The first move was the foundation for everything else. I navigated to the Federal Trade Commission's website. The form was familiar, a digital ghost from my old life. Filing the official identity theft report wasn't just a formality, it was the creation of an ironclad legal shield. Every field I filled out, my name, my social security number, the list of fraudulent accounts, wasn't a confession of victimhood. It was an affidavit of war. I attached the credit reports, the bank statements, every shred of evidence I had gathered. With a final click, I submitted it. The shield was now active. This document would now precede me into every single battle to come, a herald announcing that the target was no longer vulnerable. Step 2 required the phone. I had the FTTC report confirmation number memorized. I called the first of the 3 major credit bureaus. I was no longer a confused senior citizen. I was a professional speaking their language. I bypassed the first-level support with a series of specific code words and reference numbers from my past life. I got a supervisor on the line within minutes. "I am placing an extended fraud alert on my file," I stated, my voice flat and authoritative. I recited the FTC report number. "And following that, I am initiating a permanent security freeze." The supervisor, a woman named Linda, tried to explain the inconveniences. "You understand this will prevent all new credit inquiries, including your own." "That is the explicit and sole purpose of the request, Linda," I replied. "No new credit, ever, for anyone." I repeated the process with the other 2 bureaus. Each time it was the same clinical conversation. Each time I felt another layer of armor click into place around my life. Kevin had treated my credit history like an open field to plunder. I was turning it into an impenetrable fortress, its gates welded shut. With the fortress secured, it was time to clear the field of the invaders already inside. Step 3 was a systematic, merciless purge. I created a spreadsheet, a habit from 30 years of corporate dissection, listing every fraudulent institution, the bank with the $50,000 loan, the 3 maxed-out credit card companies, the online lender. One by one I called them. Each call followed the same script. I identified myself, stated I was a victim of identity theft, and provided the FTC report number. I didn't ask, I demanded. "You will close this account immediately. You will flag it as fraudulent. You will absolve me of all liability, and you will remove all record of it from my credit history." I was polite, but I was a force of nature. I quoted regulations, cited statutes. To the collections agency that had threatened me, my voice dropped even lower. "You have been attempting to collect a fraudulent debt. I have filed an official report with the FTC and a local police report. Any further contact will be considered harassment and will be met with a lawsuit." The bluster on the other end of the line vanished, replaced by a stunned silence. I was not negotiating. I was dictating terms of surrender. Then came step 4, the hardest one. I drove to the local police station. The air in the precinct was stale with coffee and anxiety. I asked for the forms to file a report for identity theft. The officer handed me a clipboard. I found a hard plastic chair in the corner and began to write. My name, the date, the nature of the crime. And then the field I had been dreading, suspect information. My pen hovered over the page. I saw him as a little boy, holding my hand, learning to ride a bike. I saw the man he had become, bold and reckless and entitled. I took a slow, measured breath, the kind I used to take before entering a boardroom full of hostile executives. In the space for suspect's name, I wrote, in my clear, precise handwriting, "Kevin Vance, my son." In the space for relationship to victim, I wrote, "Son." It was 7 letters that felt like a physical weight, a stone placed on my heart, but it was necessary. This piece of paper, this official police report, was the final keystone in the arch. It made the entire financial lockdown legally unassailable. It transformed my actions from a father's retaliation into the state's recognized pursuit of justice. I handed the completed form to the officer. He scanned it, his eyes lingering on the relationship line. He gave me a look that was a mixture of pity and grim understanding. "We'll process this, sir." I just nodded. The bureaucratic blitzkrieg was complete. It had taken 72 hours of relentless, focused effort. The trap, built not of steel but of legal precedent and official documentation, was now set. I drove home in the quiet of the evening. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt hollowed out, and yet resolute. The chessboard was set. I had made my move. Now I waited for my son to discover that the quiet old man he thought he was robbing was, in fact, the most dangerous opponent he would ever face. The phone rang at exactly 9:47 in the morning. I was in my study, sipping my second cup of coffee and watching a blue jay argue with a squirrel in the oak tree outside my window. The piece was a veneer, thin as ice. I had been waiting for this. I'd felt the tectonic plates of my son's fabricated world begin to shift the moment I'd filed the last of the reports. The system once weaponized moves with a silent, crushing inevitability. I let it ring 3 times. A part of me, the old part, the part that had spent 3 decades assessing leverage and pressure points, noted the timing. It was too early for a casual chat. This was a call of pure, unadulterated necessity. I picked up the receiver. "Hello?" What came through the line wasn't a voice. It was a raw metallic shriek of pure animal panic. "Dad, what did you do?" I said nothing. I simply held the phone to my ear and let the storm break against my silence. This was the first stage, the shockwave. My car loan was denied. The dealership just called me. They said my co-signers, "Your social security number is flagged. What does that even mean?" His words tumbled out, tripping over each other in their haste. "And then my business account, the one for the app, it's frozen. The bank won't tell me why. They just said there's a legal hold, and now I'm getting calls. These other people, Dad, they're calling my loans. They're demanding full payment. Today, they said they're going to come find me." I could hear his breath, ragged and wet, as if he'd been running. I could picture him, probably in that overpriced apartment he'd leased with money that wasn't his carefully constructed image of a successful entrepreneur crumbling around him in real time. The hustler, meeting the immovable object of consequence. He kept rambling, his voice cracking under the strain. "You have to fix this. You have to call them, tell them it's a mistake. You have to..." He finally paused, not because he was done, but because he had run out of air, the frantic momentum of his terror hitting the wall of my continued silence. In that sudden quiet, I could hear the faint, tinny sound of another call trying to get through on his line. A collector. The wolves were at the door. That was my cue. I let the silence stretch for a beat longer, just long enough for the emptiness on the line to become its own terrifying presence. Then I spoke. My voice was low, measured, and utterly devoid of the warmth, the patience, the paternal softness he had known his entire life. I wasn't his father in that moment. I was a forensic instrument. Kevin. Just his name. It stopped him cold. "You didn't steal from your father." I let the sentence hang there, a simple declarative fact. He had mistaken my retirement for weakness, my quiet life for simplicity. He had looked at the kindly old man tending his roses and seen a mark, an easy target. He never saw the foundations. "You stole from Arthur Vance." There was a sharp, involuntary intake of breath on the other end of the line. He'd heard that name before, whispered at family gatherings, a ghost story from a life I never discussed. "And Arthur Vance," I continued, my tone flat and clinical, like a surgeon stating a diagnosis, "was the man people hired when they needed to erase a problem from the financial universe without a trace. I didn't break bones. I broke systems. I dismantled men who were far smarter and far more prepared than you. I could feel his world tilting, the axis shifting. The image of his quiet, puttering dad was being overwritten by something else, something cold and ancient and terrifyingly competent. "You built your house on my name," I said, delivering the final, irrevocable verdict. "I just foreclosed." The silence that followed was absolute. It wasn't just a pause, it was a void. It was the sound of a paradigm shattering. I could almost hear it, the crystalline fracture of his entire understanding of who I was, of who he was, of the very nature of the game he thought he was playing. The money was gone, the credit was gone, the car was gone, but in that profound silence, I knew that the true collapse was happening inside his mind. The hustler had tried to outcon a con artist of a completely different and far more devastating magnitude. The quiet life he had violated was not a vulnerability. It was a choice, and I had just chosen to end it. The silence in my house was different now. It wasn't the peaceful quiet of retirement I'd worked 30 years to earn. It was the heavy, waiting silence after a storm has passed, when you're just surveying the wreckage. And the wreckage, I knew, was piling up at my son's doorstep. The calls started coming to me first, not from Kevin, but from banks and lawyers. A polite woman from First Mercantile informed me they were recalling a $75,000 business loan issued to Kevin Vance. As the primary guarantor, my identity had been legally declared compromised. I thanked her for the information. Another call came about his car loan, then another. Each time, I'd listen calmly, confirm the details, and hang up. I was a spectator in the first act of a collapse I'd engineered. Then the tone of the calls changed. They weren't from polite bankers anymore. They were from men with blunt voices and no patience for formalities. They weren't calling for me. They were calling about Kevin. One of them, a man who didn't bother with a fake name, just grunted, "Your boy's in a world of hurt, old man. Tell him Mickey wants his money." I'd simply reply, "I've filed a police report. My financial affairs are no longer connected to his. I suggest you take it up with him directly," and hang up. I could almost feel their frustration turning, like a heat-seeking missile, away from my fortified position and toward the one who was suddenly exposed. I didn't have to see it to know what happened next. A neighbor, Mrs. Gable, called me, her voice a nervous twitter. "Arthur, I'm so sorry to bother you, but there was a tow truck at Kevin's apartment this morning. They took his car. He was out there shouting." I thanked her and told her not to worry. The repossession was phase one of his public unmasking. The business collapse was even faster. His Sure Thing app, the one he'd sunk nearly $200,000 of my stolen money into, vanished from the online stores overnight. His partner, a kid named Leo, left a rambling, frantic message on my machine, begging me to talk to Kevin, saying their servers were shut down for non-payment, and their investors had pulled out. The house of cards he'd built, using my good name as the foundation, didn't just wobble, it disintegrated into dust. The lawsuits arrived like a flock of blackbirds. I know because he showed me one. That was the day he came to my door. It was a Tuesday evening. The light was fading, casting long shadows across my lawn. I saw his figure trudging up the walk, his shoulders slumped, his usual swagger completely gone. He looked small. He didn't ring the bell. He just stood there on the porch. And then I heard a soft, desperate tapping on the glass of the storm door. I walked over and stood facing him, the mesh screen and a few inches of air, the only things between us. The man on my porch was a ghost of my son. His eyes were red-rimmed and hollow. He was clutching a folded sheaf of papers. "Dad," he whispered, his voice cracking, "you have to help me." I didn't say anything. I just looked at him, my face a mask of calm I did not feel. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs, a traitor to the icy resolve in my mind. He shoved the papers against the glass. "This is a lawsuit! For $120,000. They're going to take everything." Everything you built with my name, I said, my voice low and even. It wasn't a question. Tears started to well in his eyes. It wasn't an act. This was the raw, terrified panic of a man who has seen the edge of the abyss and is starting to fall. I'm sorry. Dad, I'm so sorry. It got away from me. I was going to pay it all back, I swear. You have to. You can fix this. You know people. Make a call, please. He was begging. My son, my only child, was begging me on my doorstep. Every paternal instinct I possessed screamed at me to open the door, to pull him into a hug, to tell him it would be okay, to be his father. But the Arthur Vance who had done that was the man he had chosen to betray. The man standing on this side of the door was the Vulture, and the Vulture understood consequences. I looked past the tears, past the desperation, and held his gaze. You made your choice, Kevin. His face crumpled. What does that mean? Dad, please. It means you looked at a lifetime of my love and support, and you saw a mark. You saw a quiet old man you could exploit. You chose to steal my name, my security, and you tried to sell my future to pay for your fantasies. I took a slow breath, the words feeling like shards of glass in my throat. Now you live with the consequences. He stared at me, truly seeing me, perhaps for the first time. He wasn't seeing his dad, he was seeing the man from the stories he'd only half believed, the man who could dismantle empires, and he had just dismantled his. Don't come back here, I said, my voice dropping to a near whisper, filled with a finality that chilled even me. Don't come back until you've paid back every single cent you stole. And I don't mean with another scheme, I mean with legitimate work, with the sweat of your brow, like I did. Until then, you are not welcome in this house. The silence between us was louder than any scream. The hope drained from his face, replaced by a devastating understanding. He had lost. Not just his money, his car, his business. He had lost his father. I didn't wait for a reply. I reached out and, with a quiet, definitive click, closed the solid oak door, leaving him standing there in the gathering dark. I leaned my back against the wood, my entire body trembling. I listened as his footsteps retreated, slow and heavy, down the walk and away. I slid down to the floor, the cool hardwood against my palms. I sat there in the dark entryway for a long time. I had just defended my life from an attacker. I had won, and it felt like I had carved out a piece of my own soul and left it bleeding on the porch. It was, without a single doubt, the hardest thing I have ever done. The quiet these past 6 months has a different texture to it. It's not just the absence of noise, it's the absence of dread. The phone sits silent on its cradle, a benign object again. No more calls from area codes I don't recognize. No more robotic voices threatening legal action. No more gravel-voiced men implying they knew the layout of my home. The siege is over. The fortress, which is me, is secure. I pulled my credit report again last week, a ritual I perform with the same detached focus I used to reserve for corporate balance sheets. It was pristine, clean lines of a paid-off mortgage, a decades-old credit card with a perfect payment history, and a vast empty space where $250,000 of fraudulent debt used to be. It was like looking at a battlefield after the smoke has cleared, the craters filled in, the land healed. My name is my own again. It doesn't feel like a victory, not really. It feels like a restoration, a correction. The news about Kevin comes to me in fragments, whispered through the reluctant family grapevine. My sister, bless her, can't help herself. She calls under the guise of checking in, but her voice is laced with a reporter's urgency. She told me he lost his apartment. The image of him packing his expensive, useless gadgets into boxes, the eviction notice taped to his door, didn't bring me any pleasure. It just felt inevitable, like watching a poorly constructed building finally succumb to gravity. He moved in with a friend from college, she said, a guy he used to mock for having a safe job. And then the real shocker, Kevin got a job, a real one, not a venture or a startup or a sure thing app. He's a manager at a distribution warehouse. He wears a hard hat and a safety vest and carries a clipboard. He oversees inventory and manages a shift of people who clock in and clock out. My son, the hustler, is now a working man. The irony is so thick you could cut it with a knife. He's trading his time for a paycheck, something he always considered beneath him, something I did for my entire career to build the life he so carelessly tried to loot. The most significant piece of information, the one that made me sit down and stare out the window for a long time, was that he started making payments, small ones, to a debt consolidation company. He's not paying me back. That bridge is a pile of ash, and I have no interest in rebuilding it, but he's facing the financial crater he created for himself. He's acknowledging the mountain of his own legitimate debt. That's the glimmer. It's not remorse, not yet. It's something more fundamental, accountability. The understanding that actions have consequences, and that those consequences must be met, one grueling, mundane payment at a time. It's the first honest work he's done in a decade. My own life has settled back into its gentle rhythms. The vulture is back in his cage. I feel him sometimes, a rustle of feathers in the back of my mind, when I balance my checkbook or read a news article about some corporate scandal. But he's quiet, sated. The problem was identified, the strategy was executed, and the threat was neutralized. The part of me that is Arthur the Vulture Vance is content to watch the birds at the feeder and tend to my roses. But something has shifted in the neighborhood. Old Mrs. Gable across the street, who used to wave with a sort of pitying fondness for the nice, lonely old man, now gives me a nod that carries a different weight. The young father down the block, the one who always seemed to be in a frantic hurry, now pauses when he walks his dog past my fence. He'll look at me, not at my prize-winning hydrangeas, but at my eyes. He'll give a short, sharp nod, a gesture of unspoken understanding between men. They don't know what happened. They have no idea about the financial war that was waged from my quiet study. But they sense it. They can feel the tectonic plates that shifted beneath this placid suburban surface. They look at my house, at my perfectly manicured lawn, and they don't just see a retired grandfather. They sense the sleeping lion has claws. And everyone, on some instinctual level, knows to give a sleeping lion his respect. Looking back on it all now, from the quiet of my garden, I can tell you this much. Trust is the currency of family. It's the one thing we're supposed to be able to take for granted. You build a life, you build a name, and you hand over the keys to the people you love, believing they'll guard it as fiercely as you do. But when that trust is forged into a weapon and turned against you, when the very hands you helped lift up are the ones trying to pull you down into the abyss, you have a right, no, a duty to defend yourself. I want to be very clear about something. You don't have to be a former financial predator to protect your name. You don't need a 30-year career of dismantling corporate empires to fight back. My past gave me a specific set of tools, a particular kind of ruthlessness, but the principles of self-defense are available to everyone. They are your birthright. The first and most important of these is knowledge. Learn your rights. They are written down in dry, boring legal texts and government websites, but they are your shield. The Fair Credit Reporting Act, the Identity Theft and Assumption Deterrence Act, these aren't just words. They are the laws of the land, designed to protect you. They are your arsenal, and you must monitor your credit. It's not a chore, it's a patrol of your own borders. Checking your credit report isn't about paranoia, it's about vigilance. It's the digital equivalent of walking the perimeter of your property every night, checking the locks. You are the guardian of your own financial soul. If you see something you don't recognize, a loan you didn't take, a credit card you didn't open. That is not a mystery to be pondered later. It is a breach. It is a fire alarm ringing in the middle of the night. You do not go back to sleep, you put the fire out. But here is the most critical lesson, the one that took me a lifetime to learn, and that this ordeal burned into my bones. The most powerful weapon against those who would steal your future is not anger. It is not rage or shouting or threats. Anger is a wildfire. It burns hot. It consumes everything in its path, including you, and then it dies, leaving only ashes. The people who do this, whether they are strangers or your own flesh and blood, they feed on that anger. They expect it. They are prepared for the emotional explosion. They are not prepared for the glacier. The most powerful weapon is cold, decisive, and absolute action. It is moving with the quiet, unstoppable force of a law of nature. It is gathering your evidence, filing your reports, making your calls, and systematically, brick by brick, rebuilding the wall they tried to tear down. It is the absence of drama. It is the silence that follows the click of a lock. When you respond not with emotion but with procedure, you strip them of their power. They are trying to create chaos. Your job is to impose order. The most terrifying thing you can show an enemy is not your fury, but your calm. Let your calm be their storm. While they are thrashing in the waves of the consequences they created, you are standing on the shore, dry and safe, because you took the time to build a seawall. This is not about revenge. Revenge is personal, it's emotional. What I did, what you must do if you ever find yourself in this nightmare, is not personal, it is protective. It is the systemic, legal, and complete neutralization of a threat to your existence. You are not destroying a person, you are dismantling a threat vector. You are reclaiming what is yours. Your name, your credit, your future, your peace. My story ended with a broken son and a quiet house. Yours doesn't have to. It can end with a lesson learned, a boundary set, and a life preserved, all without a single raised voice. Remember the currency of trust, but never forget the duty of defense. Be the calm. Let that be the storm that saves you.